We're in an era where technology has, of course, proved to be a boon, but it can be a bane if not addressed correctly. There are issues with the digital divide, about democratization of data, about artificial intelligence itself. To talk about that, we have with us author and CEO of Incedo, Nitin Seth. Nitin Seth, thank you so much for speaking to us here at Times Now. And let me begin by asking you, the books that you have authored, you've talked about a number of concepts, particularly as far as data itself is concerned. We're at a moment where there is a data explosion happening. We're really deluged by the amount of data that we deal with professionally, personally, and in multiple spheres, even on social media, for instance. Take us through what exactly is the paradox that you're talking about and how really it impacts all of us as citizens.
Thanks, Madhav. And you talked about data explosion, and it is really quite extraordinary. Let me just first put this in context for you, that over the last 25 years, the global GDP has grown 3x. Population has grown by maybe 30%. But data has grown by 100 to 150,000 times. Let me put that again, 100 to 150,000 times. So the data explosion we have seen is really unprecedented, Madhav. We have very rarely seen something like this in the course of human history. Just to again give a different flavor to this, 90% of the data of the world today has got generated over the last 2 to 3 years. Okay. So 10,000 years of recorded human history, the data is 2 to 3 years old. So it's extraordinary, which I think we're still looking to harness. Now, when we come to harnessing data or deriving value from it, that's where the paradox comes in. Okay, it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity, but it's also very, very challenging. So on one hand, you have the data deluge, but actually to get insights or actions from it, it's like a drought. So you may have heard of this famous rhyme that water, water everywhere, yet not a drop to drink. That's the paradox. That's the paradox, that we have a problem of plenty, but maybe it's because it's so abundant and plentiful, it's actually very difficult to get something from it.
Right. But, at the level of an individual, at the level of the organization. For instance, organizations today have huge amounts of data coming in. And how do they really process this? Because you've argued that scaling up is not necessarily the best way forward in terms of ensuring that you get the best results. So from an organizational perspective, what is it that organizations, companies, etc. should be doing?
See, because of this data explosion, Madhav, organizations, enterprises, it's a bit like individuals as well, that we are inundated with data, like social media, and then we struggle what to do with it, and sometimes because we're getting too many signals, I lose the plot. I don't know what to focus on. The same thing is happening with enterprises, but at a much bigger level. They have a lot of this data. They have a lot of this what we call unstructured data. They don't know what to do with it. So their first impulse is, let's get it together. Let's invest in technology and let's bring all of this data together. On top of this data, we will build this customer 360 and then we will get some insights from it. But that never happens because the data is constantly exploding, and whatever you may invest in terms of technology will never bring this really data together. So it's like a never-ending thing. So my main point is that, and it's a little tough for me as a technology person to say, that technology is actually not the answer. That we have been giving this Kool-Aid for the last 20 years that you invest in technology and that's how you will bring it together, that's how you will harness this. No, it's actually, this explosion is too big. So the way that's paradoxically, the way you deal with big data is to narrow it down. You bring the focus on...
Less is more.
Less is more. Less is more. That's one of the mantras I've talked about. Less is more. Exactly that. You focus on the problem. You focus on the business problem. You focus on your customer. You start from there and then say, okay, what specifically do I need? Once you're able to narrow it down, it becomes easier to deal with this data deluge.
So looking at the metrics, prioritizing on them, looking at quality of data, all those things are more important than just sort of consuming all of the data and trying to process it, because one will get lost in the process. Essentially, that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying, that don't try to drink from the fire hose. We take a logical approach.
Right.
Don't just blindly rush into a technology approach, because it is so easy and so available. We as technologists are great marketeers, and we generate that demand by creating a FOMO, fear of missing out, and everybody goes headlong into that. And that is needed. That is needed. But yeah, I'm making a call for more focus on the logical approach.
Right. One very interesting thing that you just said is that in the last 2 to 3 years have generated 90% of today's data. And when you said that, I was awestruck because, what really explains the reason for this data explosion? Is it because of a proliferation of websites? Is it much cheaper to host today? What really is the reason for this massive proliferation that we are seeing before us?
There is a convergence of things that is happening. So I call it the trifecta or the three Dev. Yeah, so this is digital, data, and AI. So these three have come together. These are like colliding forces. Each one is a cause and effect of each other. Yeah. So with data, we have all these digital experiences, like you and I go on Amazon or Flipkart, or we go on Netflix. Yeah. So there is data which is personalizing our experiences, but as we experience, there is a lot of data exhaust. There's a lot of data being created. Yeah. Then that data is being used for AI. That's the foundation for AI. But then AI is also creating a lot of synthetic data.
Right.
Yeah? So it's like a cycle. It's like a virtuous or a vicious cycle. It could be either, which is because of this collision of digital data and AI. There is an explosion. There's an unbelievable explosion of data that is happening.
Right. And you have, of course, worked with Flipkart, and, you also talked about the Amazonification of, what has happened in terms of big data not necessarily being able to solve the puzzle. We've addressed that issue, but in your experience, can you tell us firsthand how you experienced it, how you encountered this? Because it's a very, very real problem that we are seeing before us.
Yeah. See, this Amazonification is like a type of a business model. It's a type of a business model like an Amazon, which, where you bring products together and, you are selling them online. Yeah. So there's a product aggregation, and then there is a supply chain behind that. And the reason I talked about that business model in my book is because it is very, very data driven. Yeah. So if you look at the e-commerce business, it's a very, very it's an extraordinarily data-driven business. So, when I joined Flipkart, I had like a shock, and a very pleasant shock, that every day there would be a daily stand-up and for an hour and a half, and there would be literally hundreds of data points that would be discussed every day. So from, your pricing, how pricing is done, to product availability, to how the supply chain works. It's an extraordinarily, data-driven business, and so that kind of a business model is a great example of how data is shaping business models today.
And you've also talked about Netflix, because it was just a DVD provider at one point of time, and then it just metamorphosed into this big platform. It's one of the biggest producers of movies and content today, and it's become pretty much the global standard in entertainment. This kind of disruption and the potential that the data space has, and with the addition of now AI, the third part of this trifecta, do you see this happening a lot more, and in what ways do you see this impacting not just media but other industries as well?
Yeah, no, again, the Netflix effect is not just about videos. It is about videos, but it is a lot more than that, and I think it is going to happen across industries. So the Netflix model to me is really about personalization. Yeah, so they take, me and my wife, if we go to Netflix and we have the same account, right, but different users, we will see different suggestions, which takes into account, what our preferences are. And that personalization is the key, to usage. Yeah, and again, it's like a virtuous or a vicious cycle. You feed in data. Because of that, there is a more personalized offering for you, and you consume it. You consume more of it than maybe you wanted, and you are leaving your own footprint. There is more data that you are sharing and using. And this phenomena of what I would now say hyper-personalization, Madhav, is going to happen across industries.
Right.
As AI further proliferates, it's not just retail that we talked about or entertainment, but even industries like healthcare or education. Just think about it. Today, education, you go to a classroom and you study, but all of us are different. And if you go back, a few thousand years, we had the Gurukul system, which was very, very personalized. But over a period of time, it's kind of become more standardized, more commoditized.
Right.
So that's the phenomena that, as digital data AI play out, every industry will go through this process of hyper-personalization.
Yeah, but we've talked about the virtuous side. The vicious part of it is also the danger of privacy. And there are serious privacy concerns when it comes to this hyper-personalization or localization that takes place. Because what happens to all of that private data, is very, very significant. There have been a number of complaints, and we've seen these controversies. We've been reading about it, of corporates which are either misusing the data for their own purposes, or some even selling it out to others. So how do we guard against that happening in the future? Because there are platforms that say, we'll give you XYZ for free, but you have to give us all your data. So, how do we balance those two things?
Yeah. No, this is a huge issue. That's why I call data paradox. We were talking about paradoxes. This is also one of the paradoxes. Yeah, that there is a data democratization, make it available. That's where you get the benefit, but there is a data privacy, data security. With that, the risk increases. I think this is the pin which can prick the balloon. Yeah, this is the pin that can prick the balloon. I think we are still, this issue is going to, if we don't solve it, it's going to become a much bigger problem. Yeah, and I talk about it in my book. And my kind of submission is that there is an urgent need for global standards around data privacy. Like, today, for most products that we consume, there is an expectation of certain minimum product standards. Like when you and I buy a car, there is an expectation of emission standards which are consistent, and there are different levels of that. Depending on what country you are in, there is a minimum standard. We need to have similar global standards around privacy. Because when you and I go to a website and we are asked to sign up something, there is no way you and I understand what we are signing up for.
Right.
Yeah? Now, some level of sharing is important, because how is that business going to make money? Yeah, Meta or Google or whoever is going to make money from my data. We have to recognize that. That's a given, because if we say no, you can't use the data at all, the business model can't work. Yeah, so some level of sharing has to happen. But then what is appropriate and what is not? Yeah, that has to be defined. You and I are not in a position to make a judgment on that. So there has to be standards around this, and it has to be global standards. Because if you make it too fragmented, I think it's going to be, in Hindi we have a word khichdi. Okay, and so I don't think that's a big problem, and I think the need for global standards is quite dire.
One of the things when you talk about global standards is Australia. They've already started a social media policy, which by law, now those below 16 cannot be, can't be the ones who can access it. You have to be of a minimum age, because we've seen the impact that social media can have on young minds, particularly youngsters who are in fact just blossoming into adulthood. Would you say that those are the kind of regulatory standards? Australia is one jurisdiction, of course. Do you see this happening in other countries as well?
I think it is. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in restricting access. And of course, there is inappropriate content which you should restrict, and there's a lot out there on the web. But generally, this notion.
But how do you do that? Because nothing can be virtually banned on the internet. I mean, there are VPNs. There's all sorts of ways to get around it.
Exactly. That's why this whole notion of access below a certain age, for general purpose websites, I think that's the flawed notion. Okay, see, again, we use this term data democratization. That is the nature of data. That's the nature of AI. You can't fight that. You can't fight that. Yeah, if you try to control it, you will not succeed. So don't even try. But how your data is being used, and so that certainly can be specified and controlled. Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make is that you need policies, but an overreaction is not the answer. Okay. This I see as an overreaction, because that overreaction is not going to be implementable. So why even do that? Let's kind of talk about things which are.
Why do you say it's unimplementable?
How can you really stop access? How do you stop access?
If by law you provide a certain age, and then those who are responsible for providing the access can be held legally accountable?
What if the user is falsifying age? Which happens all the time. It happens today.
Right.
You falsify the age and you access.
But at least there's a deterrent, would you say, that would actually that at least sets a certain standard as to what is acceptable and what is not?
My understanding of a lot of these mediums, Madhav, if you try control over access, I think you're fighting a losing battle. It's like a tsunami. How do you stop that?
Right.
Yeah, but you can control how that social media platform, what data they are capturing and how they're using it. Focus on that.
Right.
That's a more, I think, actionable and intelligent thing to do.
Right. One more interesting thing that we've seen a debate around, as particularly concerns media, is that a lot of these platforms, social media platforms, they end up using a lot of the content that gets published by traditional media, and it is the social media platform that ends up getting all the views, etc. for it, whereas it is somebody else's content. It's a third-party content, and certain countries have actually brought in laws that they would have to necessarily share a portion of their revenues. Do you see this as being something practical as well?
I think it is very important. As an author, that's an issue I also face. That I spent years, writing a book, and then that content, I kind of type it on ChatGPT, and
it's available there.
Everything is available. So, I think it's a very real issue. But how do you solve it is not very easy. We talked about Netflix earlier in our conversation. If you look at the Netflix model, this kind of thing has been happening. So like telcos, and I do a lot of work with telcos. So telcos have been investing billions of dollars into technology infrastructure, 3G to 4G to 5G. But they have not got any benefit in terms of revenues. They have been spending the money. All the benefit has been got by the Netflix of the world, because they created this very, they were able to harness data and AI, create this personalization, create this kind of platform, and they get all the revenues. Now the telcos are scratching their head. Yeah, I'm the one who was investing, and somebody else is taking the cake. So whether we like it or not, Madhav, this has been happening. Yeah, this has been happening, and when I speak with my publisher, that's a big issue they have. What happens to intellectual property? How do you protect that? How do you monetize that? I don't think we have clear answers yet.
When you talk about a regulatory framework that's required globally, one of the big things that we've seen over here happen is misuse of AI, where celebrities have the pictures, videos have been morphed, and it's actually very realistic. So it's very hard for us to, for somebody who does not know authentically where that video has been sourced from or originated from, as to how they would be able to identify whether it's real or not. Do you see this as becoming one of those factors as well? Because this misuse of AI to potentially, cause any kind of social strife, defame somebody, target or attack somebody, all of this has the potential of misuse that this technology also has. How do we bring out that regulation in terms of law? Does that have to be codified, and are you seeing any jurisdictions do that?
Yeah, it has to be, and I think there has been jurisdiction that's come around deepfakes in several countries. That I think the regulation today is that if you're notified around deepfakes, you have to remove them, within a certain period of time. But look, AI cuts both ways. Yeah, so AI is used to create deepfakes, but AI can also be used to detect deepfakes. And I think that has to become mandatory. Yeah, and I think there has to be, a regulation has to go there as well. So for example, we talked about e-commerce. Now you use, any e-commerce platform uses AI to detect fake products, fake sellers. So it's a well-established, the technology is there, no? So if the technology is used for that's the duality, that's the paradox, that can be used for bad, but equally it can be used for protecting that, preventing against that. So the only way of protecting against deepfakes at scale is AI. And I think regulation is needed, because that is so important for the credibility of the platform. And right now I see regulations which are more, remove this. But I think over a period of time, maybe the scope of regulations will increase.
You've spoken about how technology has been used very well by countries, digital, data, AI, all of that being used very well for governance as well. In India, we've seen, for instance, land records and several other aspects where this data digitization
Payments,
is absolutely. What's the roadmap for the future? What is the next big cutting edge that you see in governance that technological applications can be used?
See, I think smart cities is clearly, and we see with China has been experimenting with that. It can be a little bit of Big Brother is watching you, which I think is also the case there, but certainly personalization, again, this notion of personalization and personalization of services that a government is providing you is certainly a huge thing, yeah. The second is around automation of, like you talked about land records, and that also goes along with blockchain. Automation of various government processes. We are seeing that, I'm seeing that back in the US, with what Eon and Ramaswamy are trying to do. I think they're going to drive a massive level of automation of various government processes. So I think these are the two main dimensions of it, that, the first is, as a government, your customer are the citizens, so the services that you're providing to citizens, how do you improve the quality of that? And I think that's where personalization comes in. And the second is that how do you deliver those services, which is where automation comes in. So that's governance. I think governance is a very important thing, but I think as far as governments are concerned, it's a much bigger topic, because I think the interesting thing to think about is that, for example, in India, how do we use AI as an opportunity, AI as a disruption to, what does it mean in terms of our competitive advantage, and I think that's where a lot more of the focus needs to go, and maybe, at least my feeling is that the discussion is still focused more on defensive topics.
Right.
Defensive topics like, security and so on, which are very necessary, but it has to, I think the scope of the conversation.
More citizen-focused aspects are also required. Thank you so much, Mr. Nitin Seth, for joining us and sharing with us your perspective. And ladies and gentlemen, very interesting perspectives indeed as far as technology, its role, as far as data, as far as AI is concerned, and the need, of course, for a regulatory framework surrounding all of these. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madhav.